Fire Emblem 4 is seen to be the holy grail of Fire Emblem and Shozou Kaga's Magnum Opus. This game is also what many consider to be next in line for a remake. When last I did a video like this, we spoke about Binding Blade and the challenges it would face should it get remade. And I tackled it first because I personally believe a remake for it will come first, as Roy is not only among the series' most popular characters, but the director of Shadows of Valentia has also shown great interest in Fire Emblem 6. However, there is certainly an argument to be made that Fire Emblem 4 is equally, if not more likely, to be the next remake. However, with a Fire Emblem 4 remake comes its own set of problems, and the challenges it will face are larger and more daunting than Binding Blade ever will. So today, we are going to discuss the challenges a Fire Emblem 4 remake will face. Fire Emblem 4 suffers from two primary issues. One is slightly less important than the other. Whereas Binding Blade needed some slight gameplay tweaks and one major story alteration to fit within the continuity of Fire Emblem 7, FE4 suffers from the opposite problem, wherein its story is excellent, but it suffers from one sort of minor detail. To put it simply, the game is more a biography of the Habsburgs than it is the Legend of King Arthur. Yes, Fire Emblem 4 suffers from what I like to call a terrible case of Lannister syndrome. This is often cited as the game's major reason for its lack of publicity in the West, even including heroes. And Fire Emblem has not gone this dark again until Sacred Stones, which while Sacred Stones saw a Western release, most of the dark-natured stuff in Sacred Stones was either heavily toned down or made incredibly implicit. If Fire Emblem 4 were to be remade, it would likely have to adopt this style of writing to maintain a very shaky teen rating. Personally, when it comes to this type of thing, I prefer the implicit approach, as I personally find a reveal or concept much more frightening if I arrived on that conclusion myself. That being said, there is also merit to FE4's approach in terms of shock, but it runs the risk of catching the attention of the ESRB as well. An M rating certainly would not hurt this game's sales. The demographic for Fire Emblem is certainly old enough that it doesn't matter what the box says, at least to the hardcore fans, but the handling of Tokyo Mirage Sessions localization definitely gives me pause, as early trailers for that game used the Japanese footage and were preceded by a disclaimer stating the game's expected localized M rating. However, come release, the game was heavily neutered and censored to hit a teen rating that ultimately affected sales due to the controversy. I sincerely hope that the same does not happen to FE4. Thankfully, the prospect of it being M-rated is not as improbable now that Nintendo is keen on picking up M-rated powerhouse franchises like Dark Souls, Doom, and Wolfenstein as a means to bolster the Switch's library. Oh, and they re-released and published Bayonetta 2, that's probably important. Now, I'm sure a lot of you in the comments will be very quick to mention Game of Thrones and how it also features the same themes in a very prevalent manner. There are a few things, however, that make this comparison reasonably shaky. A big one is that Game of Thrones is locked to HBO and is one of the highest age-rated shows that is currently airing on television. Additionally, Game of Thrones doesn't justify the inclusion of these themes or make them any less egregious, especially for a squeaky clean company like Nintendo. If Game of Thrones will do anything to affect a possible FE4 remake, it'll be the subject of a haphazard IGN article comparing them. Well, at least it won't be compared to Dark Souls. With that being said, even in its current state, and the right art direction and a little bit of tact, Fire Emblem 4 could still manage to sneak past the ESRB and maintain a T rating even if the script remains pretty much the same. I'm still quite certain that genealogy exists in this strange gray area where, while it doesn't deserve an M rating, it's still a little too hardcore for a T. It's more or less up in the air. But if they're going to change the script to conform to Nintendo's Disney image, I'd personally prefer it if they gave a complete overhaul in much the same fashion as Shadows of Valentia. The most contentious aspect of Fire Emblem 4 to me is the gameplay. While it introduced many mechanics that would later become series staples, it also reeks of archaic design and suffers from a massive set of issues. First of which is the trading mechanic. You need only look at the absolute exercise in idiocy that you need to go through in order to get one of Ira's children with Tulane to wield Balmung to see how flawed and broken this system is. If any of you, however, are curious as to what exactly you need to do in order to get one of Ira's children to wield Balmung, I will now explain for you here. Firstly, you need to marry Ira to Tulane. That way her kids will have major auto holy blood, and that way they can wield the Balmung. However, the Balmung is also wielded by another character. In order to get that from the other character onto one of Ira's children, you have to break the Balmung using the other character, sell it to the forge at your castle, then buy it back with one of Ira's children, fix it, and then they can wield the Balmung. That's kind of stupid. This is by no means difficult. It's actually pretty easy to do. It just takes a lot of time because Balmung has an assload of uses and gives you so many stat boosts that you're really going to be one-shotting a lot of things with it, making this whole idea really tedious, incredibly boring, and kind of stupid when you compare it to other Fire Emblem games where you can just hand the other guy who meets the requirements the weapon. Thankfully, however, a simplified and modernized trading system is so incredibly easy to implement that I think it will probably be the first thing that they probably do. However, one of the major concerns I have is the children mechanic. I personally think its approach to children is the best in terms of storytelling, but it can be pretty shaky when it comes down to gameplay. In other Fire Emblem games that feature children, screwing up a pairing or skill inheritance is easily mitigated thanks to reclassing options and the fact that you don't lose their parent unit, who often share the child's class and function just fine. However, screwing up a pairing in genealogy, with both the generation split and the holy blood mechanics, it can make or break a unit in my mind. Because of this, the game actively discourages experimentation in favor of optimization. Hopefully with a possible remake, this can be addressed by adding a skill sharing or reclassing mechanic to help mitigate any potential missteps or mistakes new players or players who like to experiment might make. Before I start talking about map design, I want to make it very clear that I personally strongly dislike the gameplay style of genealogy. Now, I will also fully admit this is entirely on me, as my playstyle in Fire Emblem is more or less sit in one spot and wait for the enemy to come to me. And Fire Emblem 4 rather punishes that playstyle a lot. To say the least, however, the map design, while huge and full of scope, and I can definitely see why people like it, I personally find it bloated. Addressing genealogy's map design is going to be very important, as this game will likely appear on the Switch, a system that promotes pick-up and play-style gaming as opposed to solid multi-hour sessions. Breaking up genealogy's existing maps in this way is, in my opinion, both the simplest and most likely way to not only allow multiple playstyles like my own to shine through, but also address the problem and cut down on playtime so that it can promote the Switch's ideal pick-up and play nature. Let's take a look at the game's prologue chapter. The first option is to separate this map into 3 chapters, beginning in the upper right with a defensive mission of Castle Calphys, then a siege mission of Castle Jungby, and finally a route mission of Castle Evans to the left. This would essentially split almost every genealogy chapter into 3 to 4 maps within acts, encompassing the game's original unbroken chapters, allowing for it to also interdisperse exposition between map breaks and help fix the game's abnormal pacing as a result. The downside to this, however, is that this style of approach could result in genealogy becoming the longest Fire Emblem game in terms of sheer map count, as well as upsetting a lot of fans who would rather the game's scope be left unchanged. Another possible solution, and the least likely in my opinion, is to leave the maps as they were originally, but you only control a single unit, and when an enemy engages, the game converts to a zoomed-in grid where you control all your units. It would function more or less like a combination of Echo's map screen, the dungeons, and the history mode from Fire Emblem Warriors. However, this could get boring very fast, as these one-off encounters could get very tedious. What I personally see as the final and most likely way of solving this is by adding multiple map objectives in addition to the ones that already appeared in the original game, and the ability to automatically save the game and revisit your castle after completing them. Going back to the game's prologue, let's say that we add victory conditions for defeating certain numbers of enemies and saving the northernmost village. Doing any one of these, as well as saving the allied castle and seizing the enemy castle, would activate a menu prompt that would allow you to redeploy your units at any allied castle, view support conversations, promote units, and repair your weapons. This will allow you to also save mid-battle, breaking up the chapters and giving you quote-unquote checkpoints, so resetting the chapter isn't a complete and utter ordeal. Another shot-in-the-dark idea I believe they could implement is the turn wheel function from Fire Emblem Echoes. Perhaps rationalize it as a family heirloom that Sigurd passes to Seliph. This would not only allow you to reverse turns, but also plan a unit's actions several turns in advance. So if you want to backtrack them to a friendly castle and promote them, this can be done at the push of a button. Regardless of how they handle it, at the bare minimum, the game should allow you to quick save mid-battle, so if you're, say, making the final push on Wyvern Knights of Thracia and Leaf dies, you need only back up 4 turns, instead of all the way to the beginning of the map that took me 5 hours, very embarrassingly, on my first playthrough. When you get down to it, all Fire Emblem 4 really needs is a way to sneak past the sensors and a few adjustments to make it a much more streamlined experience, as it still very much holds up today. If there's anything you think I missed or should have touched upon more, let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like. I recently hit 5,000 subscribers, and I can't be happier. Anyways, my name is ZerkMonsterHunter 4, and no matter which Lord of Calphys you destroy in a Hellfire, as always, happy hunting.